Hi friends, and welcome to Costuming in Color, a monthly YouTube show dedicated to showing amazing costumers of color and the people that support them.
I'm Gigi, a history buff and a costumer and a dabbleist.
And I'm Noelle, a costumer who likes to play both sides of the historical and cosplay world. Today we are interviewing Dandy Wellington. Welcome to the show, Dandy.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you? How's New York?
Little by little, you know how it is.
Yeah. Is it cold there?
It is cold there. I was wearing a different suit and sort of freezing all day, and I was like, what am I doing? Just put on the wool, brother. Put on the wool.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what the wool is for. So before we get into it, we're going to do some house rules. The first rule of costuming in color is that you don't talk about costuming in color.
No, the first rule of costuming in color is that you do talk about costuming in color. Tell your mom, tell your friends, tell your grandma, tell your uncle, tell your dog. Also, let us know who you'd like to see interviewed in the form that we link down in the description below.
The second rule is that kindness matters. So let's get into it. Dandy, where are you from originally?
Thank you very, very much for the question. I am born and raised in New York City, in Harlem, New York City. That specific is really important to me because Harlem is the epicenter of Black culture, Black thought, and Black ingenuity in New York City. Always has been, and I'm proud to be from here. And
where do you live now?
Oh, I still live here. I'm not leaving.
That's how I feel about California. I'm like, no, I'm staying put.
Right. Of course. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing better than spending time in a place like Harlem, walking through the streets and interacting with the architecture and knowing that, you know, Duke Ellington lived near here or Fats Waller lived near here and you know, Zora Neale Hurston wrote about these streets and these people. It's endless inspiration. So living in Harlem, not just being from Harlem, is always fabulous.
So tell us what the vintage scene is like where you live.
Well, the vintage scene in New York is fantastic. It's very, very special. And mostly because of the energy of New York. It's so close-knit. There is, you know, we're all here together. It's 5 boroughs, you know, a melting pot. Everyone's tucked in together. And so what you have is a mix of all the scenes. I would say, not to get anyone angry, wherever you may be from, but I think that New York has the most potent and diverse vintage scene of anywhere in the world. What do I mean by that? Because we have these beautiful 5 boroughs, because we have an epicenter of culture that has always resonated throughout the United States, but also throughout the world, being New York. We not only have people that do historical costuming, people that do vintage swing dancers, bands, people that are cocktail aficionados, people that are architectural, historical aficionados, all kinds of things, all kinds of people that would live under the umbrella of vintage are all here together, interacting together. So it's not one of those situations where you have maybe an event where it's only swing dancers and no dressers are there or no cocktail people are there, you know. Yeah, you have a few, but for the most part, we're all interacting with each other. So it really feels like an honest, immersive vintage scene. And also, it is firmly planted in now as well. So yes, we may appreciate the aesthetics. We may know everything about the way back when, but we're not living way back when. We are butt up against the city and the hustle and the bustle and, you know, whatever's going on, you got that Metro card. You're not jumping into your old vintage car and being separate from the world. No, the moment you finish that event, the moment that you leave Governor's Island or whatever it is, you're on public transportation, you're in the world. And so that's the interesting thing about the vintage scene in New York, is that people are immersed, they're connected, but at the same time, they are still citizens of the world that we are living in here in New York.
That sounds amazing. Yeah. Vintage style, not vintage values. Yeah. What is your internet handle and why did you choose it?
My internet handle in any and every situation is Dandy Wellington. And I chose it because that's my name.
Excellent.
You know, got to be consistent. Branding, folks, branding.
Branding.
Do you have a favorite vintage decade?
You know, that's really difficult. I would say I'm someone that really loves to dabble in a lot of things, even though aesthetically, most people would sort of look at me and say, oh, 1930s. If they're really paying attention and they really know their stuff, they would go 1930s. That's what you're doing. That's who you are. Sure. But also there are aspects of Gilded Age that I love and that I incorporate into my outfits all the time. But then the amount of times that I've looked at Regency clothing, for instance, and gone, the truth is, I would say, to keep it simple, I very much live in the jazz age. I love the 20s and 30s for sure. The 40s has some magic, but then it starts to veer off into a weird place, in my opinion. And Gilded Age. Give me some of that brocade goodness. Give me some high button stances on some waistcoats. You know, I'm very much into all that. It's a mix.
Awesome. Have you ever, or do you do any kind of like historical costuming or cosplay? And if so, what kind?
I really don't. I don't do any. I mean, I pretty much dress like this all the time, and it's just me. It's sort of not there isn't that separation for some people where they wear their hair in like super awesome looking ponytail and they rock a 9-inch nails sweatshirt, like, you know, but then yeah, you know what I mean? I don't have a muggle life. Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, it very much feels comfortable. I feel uncomfortable when I'm not wearing a hat. I feel uncomfortable when I'm not wearing some sort of neckwear, whether it be bow tie, ascot, neckerchief, whatever that is. When I have shoes that may have more of a rubber sole or something that's a little closer to what might be sneakers or something, I feel really uncomfortable.
I would trip out if I saw you in like loungewear and sneakers. Like I would just be like, who's that guy?
Yeah, many people have said that if I just, you know, if I want to ever be incognito, if I ever want to just totally, you know, even when it's interesting, even when I think I'm dressing down and maybe going in more of a workwear, it's still, you know, I still have to find ways to dress it up because it just makes me comfortable. It's very possible to dress within the jazz age as a man, for sure, or male presenting, and be very comfortable. You know, you think about it, everything's being held up by something. And if it, you know, if it all fits properly, it fits in the right way. Yeah, maybe your trousers are super high, but they're being held up by braces. So it's all good. Once you get into that situation, you all of a sudden, you're like, wait a second, my legs are really mobile and really free. And it feels like I have more range of motion than if I was wearing jeans, to be honest. You know, when it comes to jackets, yeah, they may sort of fit snug, and, you know, I can feel the shoulders here. I can feel like that there's a little bit of restriction, but I mean, there's still, you know, there's not really any restriction. It's just getting used to it. my philosophy around clothing and dressing is really, you dress for the situation you want to be in. You dress for who you want to be. And in all situations, this is what I want to be. And so it just feels comfortable. It turns into this cycle of this is aspirational, and I get inspired to aspire. And so you just keep going. As they say, you inspire until you expire.
So how did you get started in the vintage community?
How I got started in the vintage community. Well, the first step is always inspiration. As a young kid, I grew up in a house with jazz, with culture from the Harlem Renaissance, and the works of Langston Hughes and James Baldwin, and all of this art, and tons of theater. Whether it be Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire, the Nicholas brothers, Gregory Hines, it was all happening in my little world, in my home growing up. So I couldn't help but not only be inspired by what people were doing on screen, but how they were doing it, how they looked when they were doing it. So the clothing was always there. It was always lingering there, even if I wasn't focused on it immediately. But I always tried to dress up. I always had that in me, and just enjoying clothing. And my mom, of course, has a great eye for clothing. Her mother was a seamstress and a tailor, creating things by sight out of Red Book for sort of the elite in Jamaica, interestingly enough. So there was a lot of that. Most of my mom's clothes were expertly tailored as she grew up. And so she passed a lot of that knowledge and that understanding of dressing to me. So it was happening at the same time, this theater, this culture, and then clothing present at the same time. You grow up, you go through college, things change. I went to school for theater, so of course I was in studio all the time. And that's when there were sweatpants. There were sweatpants at one point. I mean, you can't listen. You can't do full like jazz dance and tap dancing and ballet and not sweatpants. Like,
Yeah.
So, that was a transition. But years later, a good friend of mine, Jin Minsky, who is one of my best friends, and we are dance partners together in professional life. She started to get into the vintage scene a few years before I did in New York. And I started to dress up way more and started to really focus on the vintage details, whether it be collar bars and tie clips and double-breasted jackets and all these different things. And she saw me doing this on Facebook, I think it was, and she just hit me up and she was like, listen, I've got a little world for you and you need to come check this out. And I remember distinctly going to one of my first Dances of Vice events, which was produced by a woman named Shien Lee here in New York, who's an incredible producer. And it was just, you're surrounded by people who are literally living their best life and looking like it. They look fantastic. And then all the stuff from my childhood just came back. Jazz came back in sharper focus, the things that people like Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly were wearing came back in sharper focus. Then I was hooked. I was just in it.
So what aspects of vintage drew you to vintage, and what keeps you inspired by it?
My past, growing up, listening to early music and appreciating how people dressed from the beginning. But the things that keep me here is the community. Certainly I would do it anyway. At this point, I'm all in, the music that I focus on being at its core and on its face, early African American music. It's part of my culture. It's part of who I am. And so that would be something I do anyway. Dressing is an obsession. It is not just looking at the past, but looking at what designers are doing in the present, and the fabrics and the different cuts, and finding ways to put all of those things together in one person. So those things, I can't imagine myself not doing them. But with regards to the vintage community itself, not just in New York, but worldwide, the thing that keeps me is that word, community, is a place where people can come together around things that they obsess about separately. Ooh, that was pretty good. A place where people can come together around things they obsess about alone.
Introverts unite. Yes.
Write it down, write it down, write it down.
We got it on record, man.
Yeah, but yeah, that community is really, really important. We may come from different walks of life. We may have been raised differently. And when it comes to aspects of inclusion and, to be frank, a lack of bigotry in, systemically racist world that we're brought up in, we may find our way to that center point, to that understanding at different times and at a different pace. Everyone's trying to figure it out. But at the core, we love vintage. We love the past. We appreciate the aesthetics. We appreciate the care and the craftsmanship, and we obsess about it. So that's what brings us together. Now that we're together, we can have another conversation.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite or most epic shoot, or maybe even concert, since you're also a musician?
I've been very fortunate to have some really incredible experiences living this life and doing this job as a band leader and a performer. I've been lucky to be in 4 books, and so there have been incredible events around those books, whether it be performing at Bergdorf Goodman. I've performed at the Roundhouse in London. I performed there for a show that I was doing called Club Swizzle, and also at the Sydney Opera House in Australia. So those things, amongst many others, it's hard to nail down one. I've been very, very fortunate. I've been really, really blessed to have some great performance experiences.
I feel like that's a tribute to you and your talent and your perseverance and your level of professionalism that you put out. So it's not all fortune. Some fortunes are made.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. I know, yes, you absolutely have to work at it, and you've got to be in the room and listen, and be there to produce and create a thing with people. Yeah. And that's something that I've always strived to do, whether it be on the bandstand or working with somebody to conceive of an event or an experience. It's always about that collaborative in energy and collaborative environment. And at the end of the day, what matters in this life is the experience that we have. The experiences that we have, they are our legacy, and how we affect others so that they can pass that energy on.
Speaking of experiences, what is the silliest thing that's ever happened to you during a concert or a shoot or in your professional life?
Okay, when I was performing in Australia for Club Swizzle, I fell off the stage a few times. That was always sort of fun. Well, it's let me fill you in, because you're like, fell off the stage. You're like, aren't you standing behind a microphone singing? No, I was tap dancing on a bar. In the world of the show that we were doing, there's this bar that comes alive and turns into a whole show where you have waiters that are acrobats and aerial acts and clowns, and a band comes out of nowhere. It's a whole thing.
Wow.
And so I was doing a tap routine, and I had on a few occasions fallen off the stage because it's just not a very big stage. So,
yeah.
But yeah, that's probably one of the wildest things that's happened.
I'm glad you were okay.
Yeah. It was great. Each and every time I was okay.
Yeah, great.
So my next question is, before I get to my next question, I have an ancillary question based on what you just said. So you're a performer, you're a band leader, you're a vintage community member, you're a tap dancer?
Yeah.
You have a lot of labels.
Yeah. That's why I just go by Dandy Wellington.
Okay, you're Dandy. So,
yeah, that's difficult. It's
pluralism.
But yeah, it is difficult for people to process the vast amount of things that I do, unless I'm constantly doing them and showing them all the time.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a lot of things.
So what groups or organizations are you in that you maybe want to give a shout out to right now?
The truth is, with everything that's happened over the past few months, the main person that I really just want to shout out is all the artists, all the service industry people, all the people that make a living being in contact with people. I was talking to my good friend Michael Haar, who has his own barbershop down in the West Village. He opened that barbershop maybe 3 years ago. And, he said to me yesterday, everything that is important to our business, we are being told not to do.
Yeah.
The connections, the handshakes, the conversations, seeing smiles, all these things are being discouraged as a function of our life right now. And yes, we think about the case rates, or how things were handled, or lockdowns, all kinds of things. Those are the things that are really at the forefront of most people's minds. But what is missing? What is missing is that connection. What is missing is that bringing people an experience, not just through a large production, but through a smile and an acknowledgement, a quick thing. As a performer, when you're on stage, you may have a moment where you look down at an audience member and you give them that little smile. You throw a joke at them, and that joke, that moment, they will remember that for days and sometimes weeks. That's the connection that is so important with performing. And so, I just have to shout out to everybody who is a performer all around the world, is part of the service industry, part of a community of connections that is feeling like that connection has been severed. It's a difficult time, and I know we'll get back from it. I know that the human condition of seeking out connections has continued. I mean, it's continuing in this conversation right now.
Yeah.
But it's been difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that is the acknowledgement.
It's a rough time, and I think people forget about performers. And you know, one of the things that my group of people have been trying to get a little awareness around is also, like, you know, people like you, people who are maybe on Broadway, any kind of theater event, stuff like that. All of those people are affected in such dramatic ways, and it's almost like they're completely forgotten. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't wear the mask and we shouldn't not shake hands and we you know, all of those things. It just means, like, we need to acknowledge it and try and figure out a way to help, basically.
Yeah, I mean, one of the wonderful things about this past 8 months or so has been the innovation.
Yeah.
Has been people figuring out how to reinvent what it is to connect, to create, to hold court, you know, to tell stories. That has been an incredible thing to watch.
When we do get back to that point where we can connect with people again, what events do you recommend?
When we do get to a place where we can connect again, I recommend people to keep it local. Absolutely. Because in many cases, yes, people have been ordering local, people have been, you know, shopping local or whatnot, but just because it's easier to go to the big box stores now that maybe there's a vaccine or whatever it is, doesn't mean that those mom and pop shops that have been helping you out, that have been there for you as much as you've been there for them during the hard times of this, it doesn't mean that they're out of the woods. Their overheads, their difficulties are still happening.
Yeah.
In more ways than one. So I think when it comes to the vintage scene, spending time in your community to rebuild that, to find ways to reinvent it in a way. You know, we've been faced not only with a pandemic, but a social justice awakening, potentially, awareness of a crisis for some. And just because now the masks maybe come off and people can hug, that doesn't mean that work doesn't stop. I mean, that doesn't mean that work stops. It means we have to think about what happens in the vintage community around these issues, how we can address them, but then embody them so we don't have to address them.
Right.
You know, the conversation happens, but eventually we don't need to have it.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite inspirational quote? And if so, by who?
I have two inspirational quotes. One from my good friend Giovanni James, who was the leader of the Harlem James Gang, is an incredible performer and musical artist, and is the creator of the Scalp Shop and the brand Butcher James. In the Harlem James Gang, we say, inspire till you expire. Absolutely. Do everything you can to inspire, to push things forward, to encourage not only those around you, but the next generation to push forward, to be better, to be brilliant, to be bright. And the next is from my good friend, Murray Hill. If you don't see yourself represented, represent yourself.
Those are solid. Yeah. Those are great. If you have a message of inclusion or, equality that you'd like to send out, we would love to make space for that for you.
There's a lot of history that we're not taught. And so it is our responsibility, all of us, to learn it, to learn from it, and to move forward with better understanding of it. So it would behoove us, I think that that's a good word that you guys will remember. So it would behoove us in 2020, where we have access to literally the world's knowledge, to take up that charge, to learn the history of others, to relearn our own histories, so that we can come to a better understanding together. To people of color, whether you are taking up the charge of identifying as BIPOC, this new, slightly unfortunate, but at least important in this moment umbrella term, or, you know, or you're focusing down and you identify as whatever you are. Do not apologize for your existence. Do not apologize for taking up space, and do not apologize for making mistakes as you attempt to take up space, because that space has not necessarily been given, so you do have to take it. Do not apologize. Be bold, be bright, be honest, but don't apologize.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, that's the end of our questions. And I think you did a great job. Thank you so much, Dandy, for joining us today. It was great getting to know you better, and learning, you know, about all of your labels and the fact that they really are all encompassed in Dandy Wellington, because you have too many for us to like rattle off every time we introduce you.
Thank you also to our viewers for joining us today. We will leave a list of Dandy's information down below for you all to go follow his platforms. He has a YouTube channel. He has a Bandcamp if you want to get some of his music. The thing he doesn't really or hasn't really talked about here is that he is a heck of a musician. And by the way, music makes great Christmas presents, birthday presents, all that kind of stuff. So keep him in mind.
Yes, I have a perfect song for the winter, for those cold afternoons, called Winter Afternoon. Yes, indeed, it is available on Bandcamp, and there's a music video on YouTube, and who knows, there might be a new edition of that music video coming up. We'll see. We'll see.
Awesome.
So give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't.
And if you have a customer of color that you think that we should interview, please do leave them down in the link below. We have a little form that you can fill out and let us know who you think we should interview.
Make sure to leave Dandy some love in the comments.
Bye, everyone.